just a couple shout outs. It is so awesome to see Blaine here. Happy belated birthday. How old were you yesterday? 26. 26. I was 26 once. Seems like a long time ago. But it's awesome that you're here, and Faith too. And I want to give a shout out to Bill. You know, a lot of times we have lots of teams, and a lot of people are seen doing things, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes that you don't see. Bill has just done an amazing job with our facilities. This is not a new building, obviously. So yeah, let's give a little shout out to Bill. And Kyle came in on, I believe it was Wednesday, and did the flooring in the office, and it just looks really, really good. So we're grateful for those folks. Pastor Shane has taken the month of July off. I read a study here yesterday about Protestant pastors. The average life expectancy of their pastoring is 4 years. Right? 4 years. Now I know back in the day, you know, these were lifetime, you know, what's the word there? Vocations. But in this time, when things are so crazy, 4 years is what an average pastor lasts. Shane is on his 14th year, so it's actually his sabbatical. The leadership has decided to give him the whole summer off on his 7th year. This is his 2nd time around. But he was so excited about what God's doing here, he decided just to take the month of July off, and we'll try to catch up a little bit next year. Question I have for you is, why are you here? All right. Is it Shane's powerful preaching? And the brother can preach. I mean, teach. He's a great teacher. You know, is it Billy's mad guitar skills? All right. I love it when Billy plays, especially when I get to play bass. It's just so fun. Is it Sarah's strong voice? Is it the great breakfast? I mean, I like all those things. But is that our main reason for being here? Okay. You know, I was thinking of 2 really important reasons to be here. Number 1 is Jesus is here. Because in Matthew 18:20, he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'll be there with you. So that's a pretty good reason to be here. And a second reason you need to be here is because you're loved here. All right? This really is a group of people that love one another. And that is just so refreshing and so great to be a part of. So thanks for all that. We decided that over the 5 weeks in July, we're going to be talking about some character qualities of Christ. We've been talking about, you know, character studies of the grounded and ready through the Old Testament. So we thought, well, in the month of July, let's take a look at Christ's life. Blaine is supposed to be up here today, but he's had sort of a slow week. So I decided to step in and give him some time off. Blaine's going to be sharing next week, and we've got some people covering the bases. But we're going to be looking at some character qualities, and I thought, well, I'm going to look at some miracles and see what that tells us about who Jesus is. So, you know, back in the day, we would open our Bibles. I miss those days of hearing the pages flying. But some of you still do. Some of you are on your phone, or some of you just read on the screen as that. That's fine. But this is just a famous but amazing story called The Storm. It's in Mark 4:35-31. I'd like to read it to you. It says, on that day when evening came, he said to them, let's go over to the other side. After dismissing the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a fierce gale of wind developed, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling with water. And yet Jesus himself was in the stern asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush, be still. And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? They became very much afraid and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? So the first thing we're going to do this morning is we're going to just take a little verse by verse walk through this story. So in verse 35, it says, on that day when evening came, he said to them, let's go to the other side. All right? So, question. What had Jesus been doing all day? Okay? If you read the beginning of the chapter, Jesus had pushed himself out away from the shore to preach from a boat, and he had been telling parables all day long, and there's also a time where he was able to, probably just within the boat itself, talk to his disciples and tell them what those parables meant. All right? Other side of the sea. Well, what sea? Well, this is the Sea of Galilee, which is familiar to most because many of Jesus' miracles and ministry took place around that. The Sea of Galilee is the largest freshwater lake in that region of the world. It's 700 feet below sea level. I didn't realize that. All right? And it's notorious for storms. And one of the reasons we'll get into is because it's located 30 miles south of Mount Hermon, which is 9,200 feet high and snow-caps. My son and daughter-in-law live in Bozeman, Montana, and we're praying that we can get an airplane to fly there with us in the middle of July. And Bozeman, Montana is surrounded by mountains at about that height, in the 9,000s with snow-caps even this time of year. So that's what Mount Hermon looked like. Their journey was about 5 miles because it tells us where they were heading, and that's to the country of the Gerasenes, which is a cool story in itself because at the Gerasenes, when they arrived, there was the crazy man that lived in the tombs that had multiple demons, and Jesus cast them out into the herd of pigs, and they run over the cliff, and a lot of unhappy farmers. But this guy asked to follow Jesus, to get in the boat with him, and he said, no, I want you to stay here and tell people what great things Jesus has done for him. And he did that in the region called Decapolis, which is 10 cities, which is a majority of Gentiles. And he was a minister, and we find out later in the New Testament, many people came to hear Christ later on in his ministry because of the testimony of this man. Verse 36 says, after dismissing the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. All right? So what about the crowd? If you read in the beginning of the chapter, in New American Standard, which is the version I like to study from, it says, such a very large crowd. One of the versions says, a great multitude. Well, that could be a lot of people. Remember, Jesus fed 4,000 and 5,000, and those were just the men. So he was used to speaking to groups of 10,000 or more. And that's probably why he pushed himself back off the edge into the water so he could speak out to a larger group. All right? The other boats, I'm sure if you've been to the beach, you'll see places where boats like to congregate. I had the mental picture of the San Francisco Giants left field wall. If there's a famous possibility of a home run being hit to set a record, people will be out there in boats and kayaks to try to retrieve that famous home run ball and sell it for $1 million, right? All right. Or you think of maybe boats that congregate together to watch fireworks. So there were other boats there. Most likely they were there to listen to Jesus. And they went along for the ride to the other side of the sea. Verse 37 says, a fierce gale of wind developed, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling with water. Okay, so I said that the Sea of Galilee was famous for its storms, right? And the reason, and I had Dean Senefton in the first session, and he's a meteorologist, or he was back in the day when he's in the military. But what happens is, snow-capped mountains create very cold air, which is heavy. So it comes down the mountain, and the warm, moist air off of the Sea of Galilee is very light, and it's rising. And when those two collide, the cold air wins. And the cold air pushes that warm, moist air up in a hurry, which build up clouds vertically, and you get thunderstorms. So the Sea of Galilee was notorious for thunderstorms. All right, and then the gales were just high-speed winds that were created by these storms. All right. You think about the boat already filling with water. How scary is that? Well, water has a lot of power. And I had a pretty smart group last session here. How much does a 5-gallon bucket of water weigh?
40 pounds.
40? Yeah, a little over 40. 41.7 is what the Google says. So, yeah, 40 pounds. That's a lot of weight. Water has a lot of power. I got permission from my wife to tell this story. It's safe because she didn't remember it. But I remember it. So we've been married for a year, 2 years. And I played basketball in Venezuela one summer for a few weeks. And we went to the beach. Well, she wasn't feeling real well because the way to the beach was 20 miles. And there were 1,000 curves in 20 miles through the mountains. And the guy driving the car, he passed at any point. Blind curves, we kept paying him money to slow down. And true story. And Brenda wasn't feeling so good. Well, a little later in the day, she felt better, so I'm pretty smart. Let's go out past the breakers and swim. I mean, this is a tropical ocean. So we get about halfway out, and she goes, oh, wait a minute, I got salt in my eye. So we're standing there, and all of a sudden I realize, we're water about chest deep. All of a sudden I realize the water is down about to my ankles. And I'm like, this is not going to end well. All right? And the waves were they were about 8 feet. And we were body surfing, and we just got buried. I mean, just ground. I can just remember being ground into the sand. Okay? So water has immense power. My oldest son is named Andy. We named him after an old friend of the family that was the age of my dad. His nickname was Andy. Andy was in World War II, and he said he was in a cyclone, hurricane in World War II, where you looked over the bow of the ship, and if you were in the trough, the bottom of the wave, the crest was 50 foot above the bow. And then when you went up over the crest, it was 50 foot below the bow. So that's a pretty rock and rolling ride there. But lots of power in the water. Verse 38 says, and yet Jesus himself was in the stern asleep on the cushion. They woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care we're perishing? Now this is a picture of what historians think the boats would have looked like at the time Jesus was living. They've actually found most of the wood of one from the past. But really, Jesus is asleep. All right? What's that tell us? Well, he's exhausted. Remember, Jesus was 100% human, but he was also 100% God. All right? Ministry is exhausting. All right? I can't wait for the Kurzen afternoon nap. Okay? All right? It's a lot of work. Right, Dwayne? It's an exhausting thing. Jesus had been ministering all day long, and he crashes in the back of the boat. Do you think he knew the storm was coming? Yeah. I mean, really? Of course he knew, right? We were watching Brenda and I have been doing a Bible study on that goes along with The Chosen. People watching The Chosen? I encourage you to. And it was talking about Nathaniel. And Nathaniel said, he knew me before he knew me. Remember, he's the one that Jesus said, I saw you standing under the tree before he met him. So Jesus knew a storm was coming, right? So what does the disciples' fear tell us about the storm? Well, 4 of the disciples were fishermen. Storms weren't anything new to them. So this must have been a really, really powerful one that they were fearing for their life, okay? And what does the storm tell us about the disciples' reaction to Jesus? They still didn't get it, right? They really still did not recognize exactly who he was, all right? So why, I missed this one, why would Jesus send them into a storm? If he knew it was coming, okay? Same question, why does he send you and I into storms? A couple thoughts. He intended to use the storm to teach his disciples. All right? Maybe Jesus was showing the 12 He was in control of what seemed like was out of control situation. You ever been in that storm? It feels like it's out of control, right? But he was teaching those men that he was still in control. They needed that. Because if you look what their life was like coming with the following years, they needed to be able to trust Christ in the storm. Okay? Let's go on. Oh, I did want to make one other point. Jesus' presence in the boat did not prevent the storm. You know? I think sometimes we trust Christ so we can try to avoid the storms, right? We want life to be smooth, to walk through the flowers. But that's not the case. There's going to be storms. But Jesus will go through them with us. Verse 39 says, he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, hush, be still. And the wind died down. It became perfectly calm. Okay? So who gave Jesus the authority for the wind and the waves to obey him? Well, this is a picture of the Creator, Jesus, able to control his creation. Colossians 1:16 says, for by him all things were created. In verse 17, and in him all things hold together. This is just an amazing thing. I want you to turn on your imagination a little bit. Smell the salt water, right? Hear the wind. Feel the pounding of the waves. I think sometimes we get desensitized to what's going on, to things that we read in the Bible, okay? And to think that Jesus made it perfectly calm. When the wind stops, do the waves stop? No, waves will go on for hours. But it became, how shocking was that for the disciples? Not only that all the sound was gone. There's not even water lapping against the sides of the boat. It was perfectly calm. It's pretty amazing. I know I have to throw in a Tim Keller quote, at least one. He wrote a book called Jesus the King. It was actually an FCA friend of mine that we've referred to this book quite a bit, talking. Tim Keller says, two amazing things happened. One is words themselves, a command of utter simplicity. He didn't brace himself, roll up his sleeves, raise a wand. There were no incantations. He said, quiet, be still. He didn't pull a Charlton Heston, right? He just said. And he didn't have to call on a higher authority. He was the higher authority, right? That's to a hurricane. Jesus simply says, quiet, be still, just as you would talk to an unruly child. Secondly, the more astonishing thing is the storm obeyed like a compliant child. The wind died down and it was completely calm. Could literally be translated dead calm. Even when the wind stops and the storm ends, the waves keep pounding for hours. Verse 40 says, and he said to them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Put yourselves in the shoes of the disciples. And Jesus asked, why are you afraid? Like, hello? Really? You're going to ask me that question? I'm drowning here, and you want to know why I'm afraid. And this statement, do you still have no faith? That word still jumped out at me. So I did a little research. Jesus performed 37 miracles. If you read this list of miracles in the New Testament, this was number 12. Right? So Jesus thinking, this is the 12th miracle, and you still don't get it? I mean, he'd already turned water into wine. He'd healed all kinds of diseases. He'd cast out demons. He filled a boat with fish for Peter, right? And you know what number 11 was? He raised a widow's dead son from the dead. They're walking out of the city of Nain, and he raises this guy from the dead. And Jesus is like, and you guys still don't get it? Right? Brenda asked a pretty profound question when we were talking about this. How many miracles would it take you and me to believe Jesus is who he said he was? The disciples witnessed 37 miracles, and they still didn't get it till what? The resurrection. Then they were convinced. But it's interesting today, and even throughout the New Testament, often people would see one miracle and they were convinced. Jesus, he's a patient man to have dealt with these 12 knuckleheads all this time. Of course, you and I would have been just the same. Okay? The ESV Study Bible says the antidote to fear is faith. So that's the connection of those two questions. Verse 41, they became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" It's interesting. They were afraid of the storm, but they were terrified of Jesus. All right? Imagine. Obviously, they were afraid of the storm. But then, it says in New American Standard, very much afraid after Jesus calmed the storm. Why? Well, they saw a glimpse of who he really was. A glimpse of his all-powerful sovereignty, his control of everything, right? The Moody Bible Commentary says their reverential awe was far greater than their fear of the storm. They were standing in the presence of divine power. They'd never seen physical elements respond to a human's command. Jesus' point was to use calming the storm to reveal how powerful he really was, even to reveal his deity, that he was God. Right? So Jesus saw that this was an incredible opportunity to teach some important things to his disciples so that they would grow. All right? In the book Jesus is King, there's a comparison between Jesus and Jonah. Okay? It's really an interesting study. They were both in a boat. All right? They were both asleep. They were both overtaken by a storm. In both stories, the sailors wake up the sleeper because they feared for their lives. Both had a miraculous divine intervention. The sea was calmed. And in both stories, the sailors were more terrified after the storm was calmed. All right? We have to see what Tim Keller has to say about this because it's so powerful. Just to introduce this Matthew Gospel account, Jesus is confronting some of the Pharisees. And he said, you know, when Jonah preached in Nineveh, those people repented. And one greater than Jonah is here, and yet you're not responding to my message. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, one greater than Jonah is here, referring to himself. I'm the true Jonah. Someday I'm going to calm all storms, still all waves. I'm going to destroy destruction, break brokenness, kill death. How can he do that? Do it only because when he was on the cross, he was thrown willingly, like Jonah, into the ultimate storm, under the ultimate waves, the waves of sin and death. Jesus was thrown into the storm, only storm that can actually sink us, the storm of eternal justice, of what we owe for our wrongdoing. The storm wasn't calmed, not until it swept him away. In closing, I have a few questions I want us to think about, all right? And we'll just go through these really quick. You know, what do we learn about Jesus in this story? All-powerful, omniscient, sovereign, he's in control. In what way were the disciples being obedient? He said, let's go to the other side. And they did. How often are you and I not obedient even to simple things? Question 3, are you standing on the shore playing it safe, or are you getting in the boat with Jesus? Now, you know, the analogy here of getting in the boat with Jesus, that you can look at it a couple ways. It might be for the first time where you're putting your faith and trust in Christ for salvation. Or it might be in obedience. Jesus calling you to do something. And I think sometimes we're afraid because if we get in the boat, we're going to end up in a storm. Following Jesus isn't always pretty. There's lots. How many of you have been through some? We've all been through storms. Pre-Christ and post-Christ. You know, the fallacy is if you stay on the shore, there's still storms. Right? So there's going to be storms. You can't avoid storms in life. So the question is, do you want to go through that storm alone, or do you want to be in a boat with Jesus and people that care about you? You know, Blaine, you weren't here last week, but someone made the comment of, I think, Faith, it was your mom that said, how do people deal with this that don't know Christ? And Kevin, your dad said the same thing. Right? And in the same room was a guy trying to deal with an emergency without Christ. It was the parents. So, staying on the shore, avoiding Christ, doesn't mean we avoid the storms. What are some advantages of being in the boat with Jesus? Well, you're with Jesus, right? That's a pretty good advantage. Okay? And there's fellowship. And there's someone to hold our hand as we go through challenging times. I like question 5. They took them along with them. Do you? There used to be a youth skit. Blaine, you probably remember it more than I do. But there was a teenager, Christ was living with them. They had a good relationship. But whenever that kid wanted to go out, he'd leave Jesus behind. You know, you just stay. I'll be back. Well, Jesus kept wanting to follow along, so they finally, just in frustration, turned and nailed him to the wall. Okay? Because they didn't want to take Jesus along. So are we taking Jesus along? He's with us, but do we invite him to be with us? Why does Jesus send us into storms? For the same reasons that he sent the disciples. Okay? He wants us to grow and learn to depend on him. Isaiah 43, 1 and 2 talks about walking through the fire, walking through the flooding, and that I will be with you. All right? This question for you parents: are we preparing our kids for the storms, or are we protecting them from all storms? One of the ladies I talked with was here first service, and we read a book called Growing Up Colt by Colt McCoy, who was a one-year quarterback for the Browns. They messed up. He should have stayed. Anyhow, but he and his dad wrote a book called Growing Up Colt. And that was one of the lines in the book, that are we preparing our kids for the path, or are we preparing the path for our kids? I saw that so much as a teacher and as a coach. Parents want to make that road perfectly smooth, no potholes, no sharp turns. We don't want this kid to go through any struggles. Why? Life's full of storms. Learn how to deal with them. Okay? Last question is, what if the storm is my fault? Have you ever created your own storm? Yeah. All right. Does that change who God is? No. All right. Jesus is forgiving. All right. Sin has consequences. We know that. You may have created a mess, but that doesn't mean that Christ will abandon you. All right. He's still omniscient. He's still omnipotent, all-powerful. He's still sovereign. He's still in control. Okay? There's a line from Casting Crowns that says, though my heart is torn, I will praise you in this storm. Okay? So we can recognize the mess that we've made and repent and turn to Christ, be forgiven, and we can praise him in the storm. In Matthew 28:20, Jesus promises that I will never leave you or forsake you. One other thing that I was thinking about here, why Jesus sends us into storms, that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith. Okay? So as we go through storms with Jesus, he's in the process of perfecting us. It doesn't mean making us perfect. It means making us more mature. Last thing, if you know that he did not abandon you in the ultimate storm, what makes you think he would abandon you in the much smaller storms that you're experiencing right now? Deuteronomy 31:8 says, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." So, what about you? All right? Every one of us is facing the ultimate storm. Right? We're all going to die. Okay? Unless Jesus comes back and makes it easy for us, for those of us who know him. But we're facing the ultimate storm, death. But you know what? Jesus is the life preserver. Okay? You know what? Where do they keep life preservers? Well, they're under the seat in your boat, right? Or they're hanging on the wall. They don't do you any good under the seat or hanging on the wall. You have to put them on, right? So having a relationship with Jesus is like putting him on, inviting him into our life. Because he's already defeated the ultimate storm. But you know what? God loves us so much that drowning is your choice. Man, that line hit me when I was writing that down yesterday. Drowning is your choice. You can ignore the life preserver, and you can choose to drown and pay for your own sin. That's what free will is. Jesus loves us so we wouldn't have to, but he loves us enough to let us make that choice. My prayer is that, and one other thing about that, ignoring the ultimate storm, or ignoring Jesus, or rejecting him, I'm out, I'm not interested. In either way, you will drown in that ultimate storm, unnecessarily. That's sad to think about. Let's pray. Lord, you are an amazing creator. You're in control. You're all powerful. God, forgive us for the times that we create storms, the times that we're in storms and we try to figure out in our own strength, when you're right there wanting to spend that time with us and to help us to grow through these times. God, I pray that if there's anyone here today that is drowning in their sin, they would recognize that you already paid for it, that it's unnecessary, that they would reach out to you and that you would pull them to yourself to spend eternity with you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.